My husband was killed by horse thieves. But the real betrayal came when his family left me and our boys to starve on the prairie. That's when I learned how far a mother will go to survive, and what she's willing to become. It's funny, the things that sear themselves into your memory, isn't it? Not always the big, loud moments. Sometimes it's the quiet that screams the loudest. For me, it wasn't the crack of the rifle that killed my Thomas. Not really. It was the silence that fell afterwards, thick and cloying as grave dirt, settling over the barren plains of our supposed homestead. A silence filled with the unspoken judgments of his kin, Martha and Josiah Hensley, my esteemed in-laws. Their condolences were thin as watered milk, quickly curdling into whispers of burden and dead weight. The wind, out here on the edge of nothing, it's got a voice of its own. That first night after they'd packed their wagons, taking every last useful thing and leaving me with 2 young boys, a broken fence, and a heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, that wind howled like a banshee. It seemed to echo the hollowness inside me. Thomas had been gone 4 months, ambushed by horse thieves the law never bothered to look for. 1 bullet, they said. Wrong place, wrong time. For him, it was an end. For me, and for my boys, Samuel, just 12, and Jacob, barely 10, it was a beginning of a different kind of hell. Martha, Thomas's sister, she'd always had a waspish tongue. Josiah, her husband, was a man carved from unseasoned wood, all splinters and no give. Not our problem, they'd finally declared, their eyes sliding away from mine, from the accusing stares of my sons. They left us with 2 mules so starved they looked like hat racks draped in hide, and a crop that withered on the stalk before it even had a chance. I stood there, watching their wagons shrink into the dusty horizon, long after the last speck of them was swallowed by the vast, uncaring sky. The boys didn't cry. They didn't ask the questions that clawed at my throat. They just stood beside me, small, solid presences in a world that had suddenly tilted off its axis. It was like they understood, in that profound, terrifying way children sometimes do, what I couldn't yet bring myself to voice. No one was coming for us. We were utterly, terrifyingly alone. Those first 2 weeks, Lord, they were a trial. Each sunrise was a fresh slap in the face. The flour dwindled, then the beans. The boys' faces grew gaunt, their eyes too large, mirroring the hunger that gnawed at my own belly. Our well coughed up more grit than water, and the mules, bless their bony frames, just lay down in the dust one afternoon and refused to rise again. I didn't have the heart, or the bullet, to put them out of their misery. They just faded, like our hope. Every door we might have knocked on had already been slammed shut. Neighbors? The nearest homestead was a 6-mile trek south, and they had their own brood, their own worries. We were adrift, Clara Hensley and her 2 shadows, on an unforgiving sea of dust and despair. Then came the evening when the last of the light bled out of the sky, leaving bruises of orange and violet. I couldn't watch my boys starve. I couldn't listen to that damned wind mock me another night in that ghost of a house filled with memories that cut sharper than any knife. So, I gathered Samuel and Jacob, and we just started walking. No destination, just away. Away from the betrayal that stung worse than any physical wound, away from the grave I visited every dawn and dusk, away from the life that had been stolen from us. Miles blurred. My legs screamed. The boys, bless their stoic little hearts, stumbled more than they walked. Darkness, complete and utter, swallowed us. And just when I thought I couldn't take another step, when the black despair threatened to pull me under for good, a scent drifted on the night air. Not the acrid smell of a wildfire, but something else. Wood smoke. Mesquite, rich and warm, hinting at control, at life. A flicker of light, a tiny, brave star in the oppressive blackness, winked through the distant trees. Fear, I've learned, is a constant companion in the wild. But hunger, true, bone-deep hunger, it does strange things to fear. It can dim it, for a while. Or maybe it just makes you reckless. We followed that light, that scent, like moths to a perilous flame. And there it was. A small, crooked cabin, nestled in a copse of trees, tucked away from the main track, but close enough to smell the dust of passing wagons. A refuge or a trap? My heart hammered against my ribs. The fire crackled, the flames dancing like 1,000 tiny devils in the night air. The man didn't move much as he worked the blade against the whetstone, his hands steady, each stroke a measured rhythm. He was a silhouette, outlined by the flickering light, but his presence filled the space, like a mountain looming over a plain, lean, weathered, and older than he let on. His face was hard, like it had been carved out of the same rocks he'd probably spent years walking over. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, like leather dragged across stone. "Evenin'," he said, eyes still hidden under the brim of his hat, but I could feel the weight of his stare. "You lost?" I swallowed hard, the dust in my mouth sticking to my throat like glue. My fingers tightened around the boy's hands. Samuel was gripping my skirt like he thought he might be torn away if he didn't. Jacob didn't make a sound, but I felt his little body pressed close to mine, his breath quick, his eyes wide, searching for safety in the dark. I forced my dry lips to part, but the words caught, sticking in my chest. "No," I rasped. "Just nowhere to be." The man didn't seem to care much about that. His hands, still steady, moved methodically. No gun reached for, no weapons drawn. He just looked at us, his eyes shadowed, unreadable. The quiet between us stretched out, thick with suspicion and the scent of smoke curling in the air. There was something in his silence, something that made it clear he wasn't offering hospitality because he thought we needed help. No, it was more like he was sizing us up, measuring us to see if we were worth the trouble, or if he even cared. Then, after a long moment, he nodded toward the fire. "Sit," he said, his voice carrying a rough edge of indifference, like he didn't expect us to refuse. "Got stew left. Ain't poisoned." A flicker of something, maybe a smile, maybe just the corner of a grimace, ghosted across his face. "You folks look like you need it more than me." I wanted to refuse. I wanted to keep my distance, keep moving, keep the boys moving, but there was no use in it. The night was too cold, and my legs ached from the miles we'd covered. I looked down at the fire, the warmth drawing me in, the smell of food mixing with the smoke, and for a moment, I let myself imagine what it would be like to sit by a fire without fear, without wondering when the next shot might ring out. "Can't promise I'll trust you," I said, my voice softer now, but with a sharpness beneath it, like a blade just under the skin. I was tired, but I wasn't stupid. "But we ain't got much choice, do we?" The man didn't flinch. He just stared at me, his face unreadable, but there was a sharpness to his gaze that made me wonder what kind of man he was underneath that calm. The kind of man who lived a life that didn't care much for softness. His eyes flicked to the boys, then back to me, his lips barely moving as he spoke again, slower this time. "Choice," he muttered, almost to himself. "Don't mean much out here, lady. You either make it or you don't." I felt something tighten in my chest at his words. It wasn't a threat, but it sure as hell wasn't comfort. It was the reality of this land, of the world we were in now. It didn't matter what you believed, how hard you fought, or what you held on to. Out here, there was no kindness, no soft edges, only the hard truth that you had to keep moving, keep surviving. I didn't know if I could trust this man. Hell, I didn't know if I wanted to. But the stew smelled like the first bit of warmth we'd had in days. The boys were hungry, their ribs poking through their shirts, their faces pale under the dirt. I glanced down at them, then back at him. My throat tightened again, but I couldn't turn away. Not now, not when we were this close to giving up. "Thanks," I said, the words feeling like I had to force them out, but I said them anyway. "We'll take it." The man didn't say anything else. He just gestured for us to sit, and I did, slowly, cautiously, my eyes never leaving him. He reached into the pot by the fire, pulling out a ladle full of stew, the steam rising in the cold night air. He handed it to me, the bowl heavy in my hands, but I could feel the weight of something else in the air, something unspoken. The boys took their bowls, their hands shaking as they held them, but they didn't say a word. Neither did I. We ate in silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the occasional clink of the spoons. It wasn't much, but it was enough. For a few moments, I allowed myself to forget the hunt, forget the days of travel, the fear of being hunted. I let myself be human again, if only for a second. But that didn't last long. I looked up at the man. "Where you headed?" I asked, not really expecting an answer, but needing something to break the tension. He shrugged, his eyes not leaving the fire. "Same as you, I reckon. Nowhere. Just trying to stay ahead of my past." His words hit me harder than I expected. I looked at him closely, wondering what kind of man could leave his past behind. Or was it something he couldn't outrun? "You think you can outrun it?" I asked, the question coming out before I could stop it. He didn't look up, just gave that low chuckle, the kind of sound a man makes when he's seen too much, done too much. "Doesn't matter if you can or not," he said. "It'll catch up with you eventually." I didn't know what to say to that. I didn't know if it was a warning, a truth, or just a man's way of facing what he couldn't change. But I felt the weight of it settle in my chest, and I knew, whatever this man was running from, he wasn't done yet. Neither of us were. And as I sat there by the fire, with the boys eating their stew and the man watching us in silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, however small, was just the calm before the storm. Suspicion is a hard habit to break when the world has shown you its cruelest face. But kindness, the genuine, unasked-for kind, that's a rare bloom in the desert. It can make you forget, just for a moment, to be afraid. I sat. The boys, like timid fawns, followed suit. He handed us tin bowls filled with steaming rabbit stew. The aroma, oh Lord, the aroma alone was enough to bring tears to my eyes. We ate like wolves, like we hadn't seen food in an eternity, because, well, we hadn't. "Name's Eli," he said, after we'd scraped our bowls clean. "Used to have more to my name, but folks just call me Eli now." "I'm Clara," I said, finding my voice. "These are my boys, Samuel and Jacob." Eli nodded, his eyes holding a flicker of some old sorrow. "Used to have a wife. Lost her in childbirth. Wasn't much left for me after that." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Grief has a language all its own. We sat in the stillness of the night, the fire crackling and spitting, the world outside alive with the hum of crickets and the occasional rustle of something moving through the underbrush. It felt like the kind of silence you could lose yourself in. Not peaceful, but familiar. The kind of quiet you get when you're just waiting for something to go wrong. I don't know if it was the warmth of the fire or the steady presence of Eli, but I could feel my shoulders lower a bit. Like maybe, just maybe, we'd found a place to breathe for a while. Eli stood up, his joints popping like old wood, stretching with a grunt that echoed the sound of someone who's been carrying too many years on their back. "Ain't got much," he said, his voice still low, rough like the edge of a blade. "But you can stay the night. Cabin's tight, but it'll keep the wind off you." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. What could I say? We'd been on the run too long, our lives packed into the rags on our backs, dust in our mouths. A place to sleep that wasn't a dirt hole in the ground? Hell, that felt like a luxury. One night became two. Two became a week. We hadn't asked for much. And Eli, bless his solitary soul, never asked questions, never pried into our wounds. He didn't look at me like I was hiding something or that the boys had secrets in their eyes. He just was. There. And that was something more than I could say for most folks we met. He worked like a man who had nothing left to lose, no obligations to anyone, no debts to settle. He mended the barn, the dilapidated thing that was more holes than walls. He made a dry, relatively warm place for the boys to sleep, where the wind wouldn't freeze their bones at night. He patched Jacob's boots, which were more hole than leather now, the soles flapping like bird wings with every step he took. And, with patience I didn't understand, Eli showed Samuel how to set snares, how to fish in the narrow creek that slithered behind the trees, its waters barely deep enough to wet your knees. But as time passed, I started to wonder if I had missed something in the way Eli held himself. He was a man who had seen too much, a man who walked like he had buried every friend he ever had, every bit of love he'd ever known. He never spoke of it, but I could feel it in the space between us. It wasn't loneliness, at least not in the way I thought about it. No, it was a deeper thing. The kind of emptiness that comes from just surviving, day after day, without ever letting anyone in. And slowly, cautiously, like a frost-bitten limb trying to regain feeling, I allowed myself to breathe again. I helped in return. Gathered berries. Mended Eli's worn shirts, the frayed edges of fabric clinging to him like the last bits of something he had long since given up. I cooked when we had something to cook, which wasn't often. The boys helped too, cleaning, gathering firewood, finding what little food we could from the land. It wasn't a home, not really, but it was something like peace. A fragile, tentative peace, but peace nonetheless. Then came the day trouble rode in, like it always does when you least expect it, when you've dared to let your guard down for even a second. The day was blistering hot, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer off the ground. It was a still noon, the sun heavy, the world holding its breath. 3 of them rode in, caked in dust, their horses moving like shadows across the parched earth. Their rifles hung low across their saddles, their faces nothing but hard lines and flint eyes. They didn't bother with pleasantries, didn't care to make their presence known with friendly words. They just rode right up to the cabin like they owned it. Or maybe they thought they did. Eli was chopping wood at the edge of the clearing, the rhythmic thud of the axe against the stump cutting through the quiet like a heartbeat. When he saw them, he straightened slowly, his body taut, every muscle in him aware of what was coming. The axe was still in his hand, but his eyes told a different story. He wasn't reaching for a rifle, wasn't even flinching. He just stood there, tall and unmoving, the axe resting across his shoulders like a man who had already decided what would come next. I didn't wait for the boys to speak. Instinct kicked in, and I pulled them behind me, stepping in front of them like I could somehow shield them from what was about to come. They were small, too small to understand the weight of the moment, but I felt them trembling against my back, their fingers gripping my shirt like they feared they might be torn away from me. "Evening," Eli said, his voice still low, rough. He didn't shout, didn't make any unnecessary movements. He just stood there, staring them down with a calmness that sent a chill through me. It wasn't the calm of a man who feared nothing. It was the calm of a man who knew exactly what this world had to offer and what it would take to survive. The 3 men stopped in front of him, not dismounting, just looking him over with that cold, predatory stare. Their leader, a lanky fellow with a scar running down his cheek, spat to the side and sneered. "What you got going on here, Eli?" His voice was sharp, carrying the kind of tone that made you wonder just how much history these 2 shared. Eli didn't answer right away. He just eyed them, still holding that damn axe across his shoulders, his grip tight. "Ain't much," he said, his words dry like the dust we'd walked through for weeks. "But it's enough for me." The scarred man chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Well, ain't that something?" He glanced at the others, then back at Eli. "You know, we've been looking for you. Heard you been getting cozy out here." He let the words hang in the air, the implication clear. I felt my heart in my throat, my pulse racing as I braced for what was coming. Eli didn't flinch. He just stood there, his eyes steady. But I could see the shift in him, the way his body coiled tighter, like a snake ready to strike. The moment stretched. Something was about to break. Nice little setup you got here, old man, the tallest one drawled, his voice soft, menacing. Real cozy, perfect for hiding. Eli's jaw, usually set in lines of quiet endurance, clenched. Ain't hiding, and it ain't yours. The rider smirked, a nasty, knowing curl of his lip. Reckon it is now, unless you got something worth trading. His gaze roamed, lingered on me with an oily appraisal that made my skin crawl, then slid to the boys. My blood ran cold. Eli didn't say a word. He just stepped forward, slow, deliberate, and laid the axe across his shoulder. I reckon you should ride on, he said, his voice still low, but now it had an edge, hard as tempered steel. The second man, shorter, meaner-looking, let out a harsh chuckle. Or what, old-timer? You gonna chop us all up like firewood? Eli's eyes, shadowed by his hat, didn't waver. If I have to. A silence fell, sharp and brittle. You could have heard a pin drop if there'd been anything but dust and desperation for it to fall on. Then the leader spat contemptuously on the ground. Fine, have it your way. But this ain't over, old man. Ain't no law out here but what a man makes for himself. You're one man. We'll be back. They wheeled their horses and rode off, hooves pounding like a receding thunderstorm. I watched them go, my heart thudding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Eli didn't turn, didn't speak. He just stood there, his face a granite mask. That night, sleep was a forgotten luxury. In the days that followed, Eli's quiet demeanor shifted. He taught the boys how to watch the woods, where to run, how to listen for the snap of a twig that wasn't made by deer. He buried an old rifle, wrapped in oilskin, in a tree hollow, sharpened every tool on the place until it gleamed, and fortified the cabin like a man expecting a siege. I asked him once, my voice barely a whisper, "Do you think they'll really come back, Eli?" He stared out at the trees, his gaze distant. They always do, Clara. Men like that, they don't stop until someone stops them. I didn't ask again. The morning after the horseman's visit, the very air felt different, thicker, heavier, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Eli was up before the first hint of dawn, the creak of the porch boards announcing his vigil. I found him there, whetstone whispering against steel, sharpening his knife with that same slow, steady rhythm he did everything. "They'll be back," he said, not looking up. His voice was flat, certain. Men like that, they always want what ain't theirs, and they don't like being told no. I nodded, my stomach a cold knot. Eli finally met my eyes. "You ever shoot a rifle before, Clara?" My breath hitched. "Once. Thomas, my husband, he taught me. We hunted rabbits, back when the boys were small, and times were better." He stood, went into the cabin, and came back with a rifle. Not new, not gleaming, but well-oiled, loved, steady. He handed it to me. "Then you'll shoot again. You and the boys both. They won't take what's ours, what's yours, without a fight." That week, the clearing around the cabin began to feel different. It was like the land itself had become a quiet witness to our transformation. The tall pine trees, which had once stood like silent sentinels, now seemed to loom closer, their shadows sharp and oppressive. The cabin, which had been nothing more than a place to sleep for a few nights, slowly turned into something else, a small fortress, built of fear, determination, and the occasional snatched moment of hope. Eli was a different man when he worked with the boys. He didn't shout, didn't demand. Instead, he moved through the tasks with a quiet intensity that had me wondering just how much of it had been burned into his bones from years of struggle. The boys, despite being kids, had the kind of focused determination you'd expect from adults in the face of disaster. Samuel, my oldest, was fast becoming someone I didn't recognize. His face had hardened, that boyish softness now lost to a quiet, unspoken resolve. When he set his jaw, I knew that part of him had decided there was no going back. He had seen too much in the past few days, too much to leave the fight unfinished. "Mom, you think we're gonna be okay?" Samuel asked one evening, his voice low. It wasn't fear in his eyes. It was more like he was trying to brace me, even though he himself wasn't sure. Of course we are, I lied, forcing a smile that felt wrong on my face. We've got each other. He nodded, like he wanted to believe me but was starting to doubt. Then there was Jacob. Sweet, gentle Jacob. His hands were too small for the rifle Eli handed him, the wood of the stock rough against his palms. At first, the weight of it had him fumbling, knocking over a can when he tried to set it down. He didn't get angry. He just adjusted his grip, his little fingers struggling to fit in the right places. I don't like it, Mom, Jacob muttered one night, staring at the rifle like it was a snake, something dangerous. What if we don't need it? His voice was soft, but it carried the kind of quiet wisdom only a child could have when thrust into a situation like this. What if we do? I asked, sitting beside him on the cabin floor. Jacob didn't answer, but I saw the flicker of something in his eyes, the realization that there were no good answers anymore. He wasn't a child anymore. He couldn't be. We worked every day. It felt like we never stopped, even when the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars came out to stretch over us like an endless sea. Eli had us digging shallow trenches around the cabin, a line of defense that felt both absurd and necessary. Samuel took to it quickly, his hands steady as he moved through the tasks with the quiet, unspoken efficiency of someone who knew how to survive. But Jacob? He kept jumping at every little noise. I didn't know if it was the rifle in his hands or the fear gnawing at his heart, but he was constantly on edge. Eli would watch him, then gently guide his hands back to the task, giving him that silent approval he seemed to crave. "Steady, kid," Eli would mutter under his breath. Steady. By the third morning, my own fear had dulled to something sharper, something more controlled. The shaking in my hands had settled, though the weight of the rifle was still alien to me. I didn't know if I could shoot, but I knew I had to. I had no choice. I practiced every morning, hitting tin cans at 50 yards. The sound of each shot felt like a tiny victory, like the weight of all our uncertainty being chipped away piece by piece. Eli had been patient with me, too patient in a way that made me think he knew something about survival that he wasn't ready to share. When I asked him one evening, as we sat in the fading light, "Where'd you learn all this?" His face closed off like a door shutting. "Texas," he said, his voice gruff. "Comanche raids, long time ago." He didn't say anything else, and I didn't press. I didn't need to know more. He carried a history I wasn't sure I wanted to understand. It was clear, though, that he had been a part of things long before this cabin, long before the world turned upside down for us. The days dragged on, the minutes stretching into what felt like years. The quiet that settled over the cabin was oppressive. Every snapping twig in the woods made my heart jump in my chest. Every gust of wind rattling the shutters sent a chill down my spine. It was a kind of quiet that was full of anticipation, like the calm before a storm that you could feel in your bones. It wasn't peace, it was something far more dangerous. Sleep became something I only half remembered. The days blurred into one long stretch of vigilance, and yet there was no talk of leaving, no thought of surrender. We'd been abandoned once, and we had learned that there was no room for weakness now. "Mom, I'm scared," Jacob whispered one night as we sat in the dim light of the cabin. "I know, sweetheart," I said, my voice raw, "but we can't stop now. We just have to hold on." And just like that, something shifted. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were fighting. Then, on the 7th day, just as the sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky in angry reds and purples, they came. No grand entrance, no shouted warnings this time. Just the muffled crunch of hooves on dry leaves, the low whistle of one man to another. Eli, standing silhouetted by the front window, lifted his own rifle. "3 of them," he breathed. "Same ones. Maybe more in the trees." I pulled the boys into the corner, away from the windows, and pressed a heavy pistol into Samuel's hand. "If they get in, son, you keep your brother safe. Don't you hesitate." His eyes were wide, dark pools in his dirt-streaked face, but his nod was firm. "I won't, Mama." Eli moved to the door, rifle at the ready. "You shoot only if you have to. They'll try to scare us out, burn us out, maybe. Don't give 'em that satisfaction." Then the mocking voice of the leader drifted through the twilight. "Old man, thought we'd drop by for that hospitality you offered last time. How about we have us a little chat?" Eli stepped out onto the porch slowly, not raising his rifle, but not lowering it either. I watched from the narrow window, every muscle in my body strung tight as a bowstring. The tall leader grinned, a flash of white teeth in the gloom. "You're guarding ghosts, Eli. Just a worn-out woman and 2 fatherless brats. Why bother?" Eli didn't flinch. "They got more grit in their little fingers than you'll see in a lifetime of looking in a mirror." The man's laugh was ugly. "So that's how it is? You playing house now, old man? Maybe we just burn this whole pathetic shack down, see if you still play hero in the ashes." Eli shifted, just a fraction, but the rifle came up an inch. "I don't bluff," he said, his voice as cold as a winter night. The man's grin vanished. He snarled at his companions, "Smoke 'em out!" They fanned out, one heading for the barn, another creeping towards the back of the cabin. My hands trembled around my rifle, but I waited for Eli's signal. It came with the sharp crack of Eli's rifle. The man near the barn crumpled like a discarded puppet. Gunfire erupted from the trees. Eli ducked behind a porch pillar. I aimed through the window, squeezed the trigger, missed. But the shot was enough to make the second man dive for cover. Samuel and Jacob stayed low, just as they'd practiced, silent and terrified, but holding firm. The leader roared, his voice raw with fury. "You killed Billy, old man! I swear I'll gut that woman myself and burn this whole damn patch to cinders." I fired again. This time I didn't miss. A graze to his arm, but it was enough. He screamed, a sound of pain and surprise. They hadn't expected a real fight. Predators, I realized, were used to prey that ran, not prey that bit back. The next few minutes were a blur of gunfire, shouts, and breathless, heart-stopping stillness. Then, movement from the trees to my right, a fourth man, unseen until now, raising his rifle, aiming straight at my window. I didn't see him in time, but Jacob did. My quiet, gentle Jacob. He rose from behind the overturned table, shaky but resolute, the pistol Samuel had passed to him clutched in his small hands. He pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, surprisingly clean and true in the chaos. The stranger stumbled, a look of shock on his face, then staggered and fell. Jacob dropped the pistol as if it had burned him, his eyes wide with a horror I knew would haunt him for years to come. Silence descended, abrupt and absolute. The leader, seeing the last of his gang go down, stared at Eli, then at the cabin. This ain't worth it," he muttered, his bravado gone. He turned, scrambled onto his horse, and galloped off into the deepening darkness. No cheers, no shouts of relief, just the ragged sound of our breathing, the pounding of our hearts. We waited, rifles still ready, until the night stretched out, vast and still once more. When it was finally truly quiet, I stepped out onto the porch. Eli stood watching the darkness, his face unreadable in the faint starlight. "You think he'll come back?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Eli was silent for a long moment. Then, "Not alone he won't, but maybe with more teeth next time." We buried the bodies behind the creek, under the silent watch of the moon. No words were spoken, just the grim work, the dirt, the silence. The next morning, Eli sat the boys down. He looked them each in the eye, his gaze stern but not unkind. "You both did what men do when there's no one left to fight for 'em but themselves. You stood tall. You protected your family. Ain't no shame and fear, boys. But there's a hell of a lot of pride and courage." Jacob, his face pale, asked, Is it over, Mr. Eli?" Eli nodded slowly. "For now, son. For now. But you keep your eyes open. The world don't change easy, just the faces in it." We rebuilt in the days that followed. Stronger doors, reinforced window shutters. The boys helped, their small hands learning the feel of hammer and saw. There was a new gravity about them. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of fire and peace, I sat beside Eli on the porch. The boys were down by the creek, their laughter, hesitant at first, now ringing out, a sound I'd thought I might never hear again. "You didn't have to take us in, Eli," I said softly, the words I'd wanted to say for weeks. "No," he agreed, his gaze on the horizon. "But I reckon I needed to." "Why?" I asked, genuinely curious. He watched the boys for a long moment, a faint, almost sad smile touching his lips. "Because too many folks turn their backs when things get hard, Clara. I've done it myself, in my time. I know what it costs a man's soul. And maybe this time I figured I could do something right." I looked at him then, really looked at him, past the weathered face and the quiet sorrow in his eyes. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, a genuine smile touched my own lips. "Seems to me, Eli," I said, "you already have." The wind was sharp again, colder than it should have been for spring, carrying whispers we couldn't quite decipher. Clouds hung heavy and low, like a shroud. It had been 2 weeks since the shootout, 2 weeks of uneasy peace. A peace that had Eli keeping his rifle closer than his own shadow. Something about that particular morning gnawed at him, he said. A stillness in the woods, too profound, too watchful. No birdsong, no rustle of unseen creatures. Just waiting. Back at the cabin, I was trying to teach Jacob to mend a tear in his shirt, a skill I was barely proficient in myself, while Samuel stacked firewood with a solemn efficiency that belied his years. They were changing, my boys. Growing leaner, tougher. Not hard, not like soldiers, not yet. But the soft edges of childhood were being whittled away by the harsh realities of survival. They'd tasted it, that bitter tang, and it was forging them into something new. I saw the disquiet in Eli's eyes when he came back up the trail from his morning scout. "Trouble?" I asked, my needle pausing mid-stitch. "Maybe," he said, his voice gruff as he wiped dust from his hands. "Town's a 3-hour ride west. I need to pick up salt, some lamp oil. Maybe hear what's being whispered on the wind. You want one of the boys to stay with you or come with me?" He meant to offer one to go with him for protection, but he quickly shook his head. "No, if there's talk about us, it'll travel quicker with a young face beside me, make folks wary. I'll be back before sundown." I nodded, a knot of unease tightening in my chest. Since the attack, Eli hadn't strayed far, the thought of him leaving us alone again, even for a few hours. I didn't like it, but I understood. Out here, you either stayed alert or you stayed dead. By noon, Eli was a receding shadow, swallowed by the rolling hills. I kept the boys close, kept them busy. We cleaned tools, reinforced the small garden fence we'd started, moved the remaining firewood into the barn. Every unexpected sound from the trees made my shoulders tighten. The quiet wasn't right. It felt pregnant. That afternoon, while clearing out a small, rickety lean-to attached to the barn, a place Thomas had used for storing broken tools and forgotten junk, my hand brushed against a loose floorboard. Curiosity, or maybe just a premonition, made me pry it up. Beneath it lay a small tin box, rusted at the hinges. My heart gave a strange thump. Thomas had never been one for secrets. Or so I'd thought. Inside, nestled amongst a few dried wildflowers, a touch so unlike the man I remembered it made my throat ache, were papers. Ledgers, mostly, written in Thomas's familiar, sprawling hand. But the entries, they weren't for farm supplies or seed. They were names, sums of money, dates. And one name appeared more often than others, underlined twice in faded ink. Silas Blackwood. Beneath it, notations about land rights, survey markers disputed, final settlement pending. A cold dread seeped into my bones. Thomas, my quiet, steady Thomas. What had he been involved in? This land, the one I was fighting tooth and nail to hold on to, the one that had already cost so much blood, had it been his to claim in the first place? Or had it been obtained through means best left in the shadows? The dates on the entries were just before his death. Had his ambush by horse thieves been something far more sinister? A settling of accounts? The thought was a viper coiling in my gut. If this land wasn't truly ours, what right did I have to ask Eli, to ask my sons, to risk their lives for it? The sun suddenly felt cold on my skin. Just as that sickening realization began to take root, Samuel, who'd been tasked with keeping watch from the barn loft, let out a sharp cry. "Riders, Mama! Coming fast!" I shoved the tin box back under the floorboard, my mind reeling, and rushed to his side. 3 riders, moving with an unnerving confidence. Too soon for Eli. My blood ran cold. "Inside, boys! Now!" I herded them into the cabin, my hands shaking as I grabbed my rifle, then Eli's. "Stay low, just like before." The horses pulled up 100 yards out. The men dismounted. Strangers, not the ones from before, but they had that same ragged, desperate look, armed to the teeth. One of them, a tall man with a cruel slit of a mouth, called out, his voice too slick, too smooth to trust. "Well now, hello the cabin. We ain't here to cause no harm. Just honest travelers looking for a bit of water and maybe some directions." I raised my rifle, positioning myself at the narrow window slit. "Keep riding," I shouted back, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound firm. "Ain't nothing here for you." The man chuckled, a low, unpleasant sound. "Funny, that ain't what we heard. We heard there was a woman out here. A right pretty one, too. Got herself 2 fine sons and a tough old cowboy watching over her." I flinched. Someone had talked. Word had gotten out. But who? How? "You step 1 foot closer," I warned, "and I'll put a hole through you." Now, ma'am," the man drawled, taking a step forward, then another. "Ain't no need for bloodshed. You're all alone out here, seems like. It's a crying shame. If you just come on out and we have a little talk, real friendly like, maybe we could help each other." His eyes glinted. Jacob's small, cold fingers wrapped around my coat sleeve. Samuel, bless his brave heart, had the pistol Eli had left, his young face a mask of grim determination. "We're not alone," I shouted, a desperate bluff. "He'll be back any minute, and he won't be happy to find you here." The man paused, then a dark, knowing smile spread across his face. "No, ma'am," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial purr. "No, he won't. Fact is, that old man of yours, he ain't making it back at all." My heart stopped. For a moment, the world went silent, the air sucked from my lungs. What did you say?" "Oh, we ran into him down near the creek pass," the man said, clearly enjoying my reaction. "He was tough. I'll give him that. Real tough for an old fella. Shame what happened." "A real shame," Jacob whimpered, a tiny, heartbroken sound. Samuel looked like he might launch himself through the window, pistol blazing. I held firm, my mind racing. Were they lying, trying to break me, or was Eli? "I don't believe you," I said, my voice a hoarse whisper. "You don't have to believe me, ma'am," the man said, his smile widening. "But you might want to consider what happens next. Just come on out and maybe your boys don't have to suffer for your stubbornness." I didn't think. I just fired. The shot missed his head by a hair, kicking up dust behind him, but it startled them. One of his companions yelped and dove for cover. The other cursed and fired back wildly. Wood splintered from the cabin corner, showering us with debris. The air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and panic. "Samuel, stay with Jacob," I yelled, shoving an old dresser against the door. "No matter what happens, you keep him down." "What if they come through, Mama?" Samuel's voice cracked, the bravado gone. "Then you shoot, son. You shoot to protect your brother." The men tried to flank the cabin, using the sparse trees for cover. Gunfire exploded around us. I fired again, felt a jolt of grim satisfaction as one of them screamed and clutched his thigh. 2 more to go. But how long could we hold them off? Was Eli truly gone? The despair was a cold hand, squeezing my heart. Then, through the smoke and chaos, a new sound, swift, urgent hoofbeats. My head snapped up. A lone horse, one rider, coming hard. My breath caught. Blood streamed down one sleeve. His face was a mask of dirt, sweat, and furious rage. Eli. He was alive. He didn't speak, didn't need to. He reined in his heaving horse, lifted his rifle, took aim with deadly precision, and dropped one of the attackers with a single clean shot that silenced everything for a stunned heartbeat. The last man, the leader, turned to run, scrambling for his horse, but Eli's second bullet hit him square between the shoulder blades. He fell like a stone, without a sound. When the dust began to settle, I burst through the door, racing towards him. "Eli! You're bleeding!" He swayed as he dismounted, bracing himself on my shoulder. "Got jumped! Near the creek trail!" he gasped, his face pale beneath the grime. "Bastard clipped me, then ran, saw the smoke from your chimney, knew they'd come here next." I helped him inside, my hands trembling as I tore strips from a clean petticoat to bind his arm. "You saved us," I whispered, tears finally breaking free, tracing paths through the dust on my cheeks. "I thought they said you were—" Eli managed a faint, tired smile. "Takes more than a couple of mangy coyotes to finish this old dog." He looked at the boys, then at me. "You didn't need saving, Clara. You held the line. You always do." That night, after we'd dealt with the grim task of dragging the bodies further into the woods, leaving them for the scavengers, Eli rested. I sat by the fire with the boys, the fear slowly receding, replaced by a bone-deep weariness and a simmering anger. "Why do they keep coming, Mama?" Jacob asked, his voice small and troubled, his eyes still holding the shadow of what he'd seen, what he'd done. I pulled him close, stroking his hair. "Because, my love," I said, looking into the flames, "we've got something they want, something they don't understand." "What's that?" Samuel asked, his voice still rough with the remnants of the fight. "A reason to fight," I said. "A home. Each other." Samuel stared into the fire, his young face old for its years. "We're not going to leave, are we, Mama? Not ever?" I shook my head, a fierce resolve hardening within me. "No, Samuel. This is ours now. We don't run. Not anymore." Later, as moonlight bathed the cabin in a silver glow, Eli stirred. I was sitting by his makeshift bed, watching his shallow breathing. His eyes fluttered open. "There'll be more," he said, his voice weak but firm. "This ain't the end of it. Let them come," I answered, my voice stronger than I felt. "We're ready now." He looked at me then. Really looked. Not as the broken widow he'd found wandering in the wilderness, but as someone else. Someone forged in fire and tempered by survival. "You've changed, Clara," he said softly. "So have you, Eli," I replied. A quiet understanding passed between us, a shared resilience born of common struggle. I reached out and took his hand, his grip surprisingly strong. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, both of us closed our eyes without the immediate dread of what the next dawn might bring. But peace, I was learning, was a fickle creature in this land. Just when you thought you had a hold of it, it would slip through your fingers like water. Not long after that last attack, maybe a week or so, just as Eli's arm was beginning to mend properly, we had visitors. Not riders with guns, not this time. This time, it was a different kind of chill that went down my spine. It was Martha and Josiah Hensley, my in-laws. They came trundling up the track in a borrowed buckboard, looking worn and a little sheepish. Martha even managed to conjure up a few tears when she saw me. "Clara, dear," she exclaimed, rushing forward as if to embrace me, though I sidestepped just enough to make it awkward. We heard you'd had some trouble. We've been so worried. We never should have left you and the boys like that. It was a terrible mistake, a moment of weakness. Can you ever forgive us?" Josiah just stood there, shuffling his feet, looking anywhere but at me. Forgive them? The words were like ash in my mouth. I remembered their cold eyes, their dismissive words, the way they'd stripped our home bare. "What do you want, Martha?" I asked, my voice flat. "Want?" She feigned surprise. "Why, to help, of course. To make amends. We're family, Clara. Thomas would have wanted us to look after you." Family. The word felt like a mockery. Eli had stepped out onto the porch, his good arm resting near the rifle propped by the door. His presence was a silent warning. They stayed. They wheedled and whined and invoked Thomas's memory until I, fool that I was, or maybe just too tired to fight another battle on another front, relented. "They could stay in the barn," I said. "Help with the chores." For the boys' sake, I told myself, so they'd know some kin, however flawed. But Martha's eyes, they had a new glint in them, a calculating look as she surveyed the mended fences, the reinforced cabin, the determined set of Eli's jaw. She saw not a desperate widow, but a salvaged homestead, a defensible position. And I started to wonder if their return was less about reconciliation and more about opportunity. Especially when Josiah started asking quiet, indirect questions about the land, about how much Eli knew of farming, about who held the deed now Thomas was gone. My discovery of Thomas's tin box and the name Silas Blackwood felt like a cold stone in my stomach. Were they connected? It was about this time that the travelers showed up. 3 men and a younger woman, looking for all the world like a family down on their luck, seeking shelter for a night. They were polite, almost too polite. The leader, a man named Jed, had a ready smile, but his eyes were like a winter sky, cold and empty. He said they were heading west, to California, heard there was work. Eli was wary. I was practically vibrating with suspicion. Martha, however, simpered and fussed over them, offering them the last of our coffee, chattering about how hard the trail was. "Poor souls," she'd said to me later. "It's our Christian duty to help, Clara." I watched Jed. He moved with a quiet confidence that didn't quite match his story of misfortune. He asked too many questions about the surrounding area, about how many of us there were, about Eli's arm. And once, I saw him looking at the graves behind the creek, the ones where the raiders lay, with an expression that was far from disinterested. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, my rifle across my lap. A sliver of moon cast long dancing shadows, and then I saw it, Jed, slipping out of the barn where they'd been bedded down, moving with a stealth that was anything but farmer-like. He went towards the creek, towards those graves. I woke Eli with a touch. We followed, silent as ghosts. We saw him standing there by the newest mounds of earth. He wasn't praying, he was examining. He picked up a spent cartridge casing I must have missed. Then he looked towards our cabin, and even in the dim light, I saw the hatred in his face. "He knows," Eli whispered beside me. "He was one of them, or with them." The next morning, Jed and his family were all smiles again. But the charade was over. Eli confronted him. "You knew the men buried out there, didn't you, Jed?" Jed's smile vanished. "They were my friends," he spat. "Good men, murdered by you and that bitch of yours." His eyes, fixed on me, were murderous. The family tensed, hands inching towards hidden weapons. "They came here looking for trouble," Eli said, his voice dangerously low. "They found it." It was a standoff, tense, ugly. Martha shrieked. Josiah looked ready to bolt. It was Samuel, my Samuel, who broke it. He'd been listening from the cabin door, and he stepped out, pistol steady in his hand, aimed right at Jed's chest. "You touch my mother, or Mr. Eli," he said, his voice surprisingly deep and unwavering, "and I'll send you to meet your friends." Jed looked at Samuel, then at Eli, then at me. He saw the resolve in our eyes. He saw we weren't the easy prey he'd imagined. He and his group backed off, slowly, then mounted their horses and rode away, but not before Jed cast one last venomous look over his shoulder. "This ain't over," he promised. "There are more of us. We don't forget." The air was thick with unspoken fears after they left. Martha wrung her hands. "Oh, dear Lord, they'll bring others." "They were always going to bring others, Martha," I said tiredly. The unease from Thomas's papers, the return of the Hensleys, now Jed's threat. It was all coiling together, like a nest of snakes. Silas Blackwood. The name from Thomas's ledger echoed in my mind. I had to know. I confronted Josiah one evening when Martha was out of earshot, ostensibly checking snares with Jacob. "Josiah," I said, keeping my voice even, "did Thomas ever mention a man named Silas Blackwood?" He paled. Actually paled. He stammered, denied it, but his eyes darted around like trapped birds. I pressed him, told him about the ledgers, the land notations. Finally, broken, he confessed. Yes, Thomas had dealings with Blackwood. Blackwood was a powerful man from back east, involved in land speculation, some said less savory ventures. Thomas had apparently made a deal for this very tract of land, a deal that had gone sour, or Blackwood had felt cheated. Blackwood believed the land, and whatever might be on it or under it was rightfully his. Thomas's ambush had likely been Blackwood's men sending a message or trying to reclaim their property. "Martha knows," Josiah whispered, his face slick with sweat. She thought if Blackwood came and we were here, maybe we could make a deal with him. Get a piece of it ourselves. She said you were too stubborn, too sentimental about this place." Betrayal, fresh and sharp, twisted in my gut. My own kin. The ones who were supposed to be family. It was clear then. The attacks weren't random. They were targeted. And my in-laws weren't here to help. They were vultures waiting for the kill. The information about Blackwood spurred Eli. He said if a man like that was involved, he'd have resources, men. He'd heard whispers in town about a large group gathering up in Barlow Gulch, an old abandoned mining camp. "Could be him," Eli said, his face grim. "Could be they're building a private army." He decided we had to see for ourselves. I insisted on going with him. Leaving the boys was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but Samuel, my stoic Samuel, nodded gravely. "We'll hold the cabin, Mama. Jacob and me. We know what to do." Jacob, though, clung to me, his small face buried in my skirt, until Eli gently pried him away. Martha and Josiah watched us go, Martha's face a mask of false concern, Josiah's openly fearful. I didn't trust them an inch. I told Samuel to watch them as much as the woods. The ride to Barlow Gulch was tense through rough country. We found it, a hidden valley, and what we saw confirmed our worst fears. It wasn't just a camp, it was an outpost. Dozens of men, armed, organized, reinforcing old structures, unloading crates. A man in a wide-brimmed hat and a long, dark coat barked orders, his posture starkly military. This wasn't some ragtag band of outlaws. This was an army. Blackwood's army. "This is bad, Clara," Eli breathed beside me as we lay hidden on the ridge, observing. "Real bad." As we tried to slip away, a loose stone under Eli's boot clattered down the slope. A sentry's head snapped up. "Who's there?" We ran. Bolted for our horses, shots cracking through the air around us, ripping through leaves, thudding into tree trunks. One tore through my sleeve, a searing kiss of hot lead. We rode like the devil himself was on our heels, not daring to look back, expecting pursuit at any moment. We made it back to the cabin, breathless, hearts pounding. The boys were safe, thank God. Samuel reported that Martha had been jumpy all day, trying to get him to leave his post at the window. "They saw us," Eli said, pacing the small cabin, his face like thunder. "Which means they know we know. They'll come, and they'll come hard." "Not tonight," I said, reloading my rifle, my hands surprisingly steady. "They'll want to make a show of it. They'll want to be sure." We've got maybe 2 days, Eli estimated. Maybe less. It was then, as we were desperately planning, trying to figure out how to defend against such a force, that the real betrayal struck. Jacob came running in, his face white. "Mama, Mama, it's Aunt Martha. I saw her." She snuck out, heading towards the woods, in the direction of Barlow Gulch. My blood turned to ice. Martha, she was going to them, to warn them, to guide them, to sell us out completely for a piece of whatever blood money Blackwood offered. Eli and I exchanged a look. There was no time to go after her. We had to prepare for everything. "She always was a greedy fool," Eli muttered. "But this is a death sentence she's signing for us all." The next day was a blur of frantic activity, fortifying, setting traps, checking ammunition. Samuel and Jacob worked like Trojans, their small faces grim. The air was thick with unspoken fear, but also a grim determination. We would not break. And then, a flicker of hope from an unexpected quarter. A young man, hardly more than a boy himself, stumbled out of the woods, waving a dirty white cloth. He was gaunt, dressed in rough clothes, and looked half-starved. It was Ben Carter, one of Jed's family, the one who'd looked away when Jed threatened us. "Don't shoot," he pleaded, his voice cracking. I had to come. Jed, he's with them. The men from the gulch. He told them about you, about the old man, the woman who shoots straight, the boys. He's guiding them. They're planning to attack at dawn tomorrow. They think you're just a few, easy to overrun." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of fear and shame. I couldn't be part of it. Not after. My pa, he was a good man. He wouldn't have stood for this. They forced me to ride with them after my family. Well, it don't matter. But I ain't no killer of women and children. Eli searched his face. I saw the conflict there. Could we trust him? But his desperation seemed genuine. He told us their numbers, their likely approach. It wasn't much, but it was something. A fighting chance. "Why are you telling us this, boy?" Eli asked, his voice rough. Ben Carter looked down at his scuffed boots. Maybe I'm hoping there's still a decent man left inside me somewhere. And maybe I want to see men like Jed and that Blackwood get what's coming to them. As dusk fell, casting long, eerie shadows across the valley, the air seemed to hold its breath. The faint sound of a wind stirring the dry grasses and the whisper of branches creaking under the weight of the coming night only heightened the tension. My heart raced in my chest, hammering as I glanced toward the tree line, where the first signs of movement emerged. The rustling sound, like a whisper of death through the leaves, made every nerve in my body tense. I braced myself, expecting the first wave of attackers, the grim face of Blackwood or his men pushing through the underbrush. My hand instinctively reached for the rifle Eli had given me, but before I could steady myself, the figure stepped fully into view. My breath caught in my throat, and for a split second, I couldn't move. A man, bent and stooped with age, his form barely visible in the dimming light. The rifle he carried was old, worn like him, but it was unmistakable. Jebediah. Old man Jebediah from down the creek. The neighbor who, when Thomas had died, had muttered something about his own mouths to feed, and never once offered a hand. I hadn't seen him in months, not since the funeral. He'd kept his distance, and we'd kept ours. He hobbled closer, his gait slow but deliberate, each step heavy with the weight of years. He wore the same faded, patched-up clothes he always had, the kind of workwear that had long ago become part of his skin. His face was drawn and lined with deep furrows, his skin the color of old leather, but his eyes were sharp, still alert, like a man who had seen too much to ever truly trust the world again. "Heard you folks might be expecting company," he said, his voice low and dry, like a rustling breeze over autumn leaves, his words carrying an edge of something gritty, something hard-earned. The old man spat a stream of tobacco juice to the side, watching it hit the dirt with an almost practiced precision. Figured you could use an extra gun. These Blackwood types, they ain't welcome in this valley. Never were. I was frozen in place. My heart skipped a beat, and my mind tried to process what he was saying. Jebediah? Of all the people, why would he come here? He'd made it clear he had no interest in helping when Thomas had died. No interest in getting involved in anything that didn't directly concern him. Yet here he was, standing in front of us, an offer of help hanging in the air like a promise or a threat. I swallowed hard, my voice a ragged whisper. Jebediah? But why? He didn't hesitate, his weathered face betraying no hint of emotion. He shrugged slightly, the motion slow but deliberate, as though the weight of the world had long since settled on his shoulders and left him indifferent to much else. Lived here nigh on 60 years, he muttered, his eyes momentarily clouded with memory. Seen good men and bad, watched plenty of 'em come and go. Some deserved it. Others, well, they didn't. Thomas, he made his mistakes, but he weren't all bad. And you, ma'am, you and your boys and Eli here, you got grit. This land, it needs folks with grit, not vultures like Blackwood and his hired guns. I wasn't sure what I had expected from Jebediah, but it wasn't this. The old man who had turned his back on us when we needed help the most was standing here now, offering not just words, but his time, his experience, and most importantly, his gun. My mind raced. What had changed? Was it guilt for standing by when Thomas died? Was it his way of making up for turning his back? Or was it simply the cold reality of the danger that was now at our doorstep? Jebediah shifted his weight, his hand gripping the rifle tighter as he adjusted it, his eyes narrowing slightly in the fading light. A grim smile touched his lips, though it didn't reach his eyes. Besides, he continued, his voice low and serious now, I know these hills. Know 'em like the back of my hand. Might even know a few surprises for 'em. There it was, the twist that none of us saw coming. Jebediah, the solitary settler, the man who'd always kept to himself, was now a part of our small, unlikely band of defenders. I didn't know what had driven him to offer his help, but it didn't matter. In this moment, we were a little less alone, a little less vulnerable. Eli, who'd been silent the entire time, watching Jebediah with a quiet intensity, spoke for the first time. His voice was calm, but there was an edge of respect in it I hadn't expected. We can use all the help we can get, he said, giving a short nod toward the old man. But this won't be easy. Blackwood won't stop at nothing. Jebediah's eyes, as sharp as ever, flicked toward Eli. I didn't figure on easy, he replied, his voice gravelly but steady. I've lived too long for easy. And these hills? They're mine. Ain't no man, Blackwood or otherwise, gonna take 'em from me without a fight. A long silence passed between the three of us. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, tension, acceptance, and the knowledge that something had just shifted. Jebediah, the man who had once seemed like nothing more than a relic of a bygone time, had just become something we never expected, an ally, a protector. Well then, Eli said, breaking the silence, his voice low and steady as he turned toward me. Looks like we got ourselves a plan. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure what kind of plan we had now. But the fact that Jebediah was with us, ready to stand against whatever was coming, was something. It was a glimmer of hope in a world that had mostly forgotten how to hope. And just like that, our small band of defenders had grown. A repentant raider, an old settler, and 2 weary souls who had already lost so much. What kind of chance did we have? I wasn't sure, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next, we'd face it together. The wind picked up again, rustling the leaves and the dry grasses in the valley, and the light from the setting sun cast long shadows over the land. The valley seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what was to come. And as the night settled in, a heavy weight pressed down on all of us, one that spoke of things left unsaid, of betrayals past, and the reckoning that was coming. The Blackwood men were out there, somewhere. And they would soon learn the same thing Jebediah had known for years. This land wasn't theirs to take, not without a fight. The attack came just before dawn, as Ben had warned. A wave of men, dark shapes moving through the pre-dawn gloom, led by the black-coated military man we'd seen at Barlow Gulch, with Jed and, I saw with a fresh stab of fury, Martha, skulking at the rear, pointing towards our cabin. "You got one chance!" the leader bellowed, his voice echoing in the stillness. "Silas Blackwood owns this land. Surrender, and you might live to walk away." "This land is ours," I shouted back, my voice surprisingly strong. "Paid for in sweat and blood. You want it, you come and take it." Eli stood beside me, Jebediah on my other side. Samuel was in the barn loft with Ben Carter, both armed. Jacob, bless his brave little soul, was inside the cabin, tasked with reloading and passing ammunition, his small face pale but set. "We'll walk through your ashes before that happens," Eli added, his voice like flint. The leader sneered. "So be it. No prisoners." And then hell erupted. Gunfire tore through the morning air, bullets slammed into the cabin walls, splintered the fence posts. They came on, confident in their numbers. But we were ready. Jebediah, it turned out, knew more than just the hills. He knew about an old, unstable mine shaft not far from our main defensive trench. A few well-placed charges he'd hoarded for years, and a section of their advance collapsed into a chasm of dirt and rock, taking a dozen men with it. Screams and chaos. Still, they came. They were disciplined, well-armed. The black-coated leader urged them on, relentless. We fought like demons. I saw Samuel pick off 2 men trying to flank the barn. Ben Carter fought with a desperate ferocity, as if trying to wash away his past sins with each shot. Eli was magnificent. He moved with a deadly grace, his rifle speaking with calm authority. He seemed to be everywhere, shoring up a weak point, steadying a wavering hand, his presence a bulwark against the tide. Then I saw the leader take aim. Not at me, not at Jebediah, at Eli. He was too exposed, directing fire. "Eli, look out!" I screamed. Eli turned, saw the danger, tried to move, but it was too late. The bullet caught him high in the chest. He staggered, a look of surprise on his face. He didn't fall immediately. He raised his rifle one last time, fired, and the black-coated leader clutched his own chest, a dark stain blossoming there before toppling from his horse. Then Eli crumpled. A sound tore from my throat, inhuman, a raw agony. I scrambled towards him, oblivious to the bullets still flying. Jebediah and Ben laid down covering fire. "Clara!" Eli coughed, blood on his lips. His eyes, though, were clear. He reached up, touched my cheek. "Good fight. You keep 'em safe. Tell the boys." His voice faded. A small, almost peaceful smile touched his lips, as if he was seeing something, or someone, far beyond the smoke and chaos of the battlefield. And then, he was still. The world went red. A rage, cold and consuming, filled me. Eli, gone. But his sacrifice and the fall of their leader broke the attackers' spirit. They faltered. Jed, seeing his commander down and their ranks thinning, tried to rally them, but his voice was shrill with panic. "For Eli!" I screamed, my voice raw, and fired again. Jebediah was beside me, his old rifle spitting death. Samuel and Ben poured fire from the barn. Jacob, seeing his chance, even took a shot from the cabin window with the pistol, forcing one attacker to duck at a critical moment. The fight wasn't over, but the tide had turned. They began to fall back, then break and run, a disorganized rabble fleeing into the woods, leaving their dead and wounded behind. Jed was among the first to flee, coward that he was. When the last shot faded, an eerie silence fell, broken only by the whimpers of the wounded and the ragged gasps of the survivors. Our survivors. I knelt beside Eli, tears streaming down my face, mingling with gunpowder and grime. My rock, my friend. gone. Samuel and Jacob reached us, their faces streaked with tears, their small bodies trembling. Jebediah put a hand on my shoulder. He died a hero, Clara, saved us all by taking out their leader. Ben Carter stood awkwardly nearby, his head bowed. He was a good man, ma'am, a brave man. We had won. But the cost, oh, the cost was devastating. The aftermath was grim. We buried Eli beside the creek, near the place where he'd first offered us shelter. A simple wooden cross marked his grave. We tended our wounded. Ben had taken a bullet in the arm, Jebediah a nasty graze to the head. The boys, miraculously, were physically unharmed, but the shadows in their eyes were deep. What of Martha and Josiah? Josiah had cowered in the root cellar throughout the fight. Martha we found trying to sneak away with a sack of provisions as the battle waned. Her face was a mask of terror and thwarted greed. You bitch, she spat at me when Jebediah dragged her back. This is all your fault. If you'd just listened to reason, made a deal. I looked at her, at the woman who was my dead husband's sister, the woman who had betrayed us, who had been willing to see us all slaughtered for her own gain. There was no remorse in her eyes, only bitter resentment. I didn't have it in me to kill her, not in cold blood, but I couldn't let her stay. Get out, Martha, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Take Josiah, take what you can carry on your backs, and never ever come back here. If I see your face again, I will not be so merciful. They left, scuttling away like the vermin they were, disappearing into the wilderness they had tried to condemn us to. Good riddance. Silas Blackwood? With his hired army shattered and its leader dead, his threat seemed to diminish. Jebediah knew folks in the territorial capital, folks who had no love for Blackwood's predatory dealings. He said he'd send word, let them know what had happened here. Men like Blackwood, Jebediah had said, they only respect strength, and you've shown 'em plenty of that, Clara. We never heard from Silas Blackwood directly again. Perhaps he cut his losses. Perhaps the whispers of the fight at our small cabin, the fight that broke a small army, were enough to deter him. Weeks turned into months. A fragile peace settled over our valley. Ben Carter, after his arm healed, decided to stay. He was quiet, hardworking, and fiercely loyal to me and the boys. He never spoke of his past, and we never asked. Jebediah became a regular visitor, sharing his wisdom, his stories, and the occasional freshly caught fish. Word of our stand, of the safe haven we'd carved out, spread. Slowly, other settlers began to arrive, a widow with a young daughter, an old trapper who'd lost his leg to a bear trap, a young couple with a newborn and nowhere else to turn. Our small cabin grew. New structures rose around it, built with shared hands and a common purpose. Smoke curled from new chimneys. The sound of children's laughter, hesitant at first, then stronger, began to fill the valley. It wasn't the life I'd imagined with Thomas, but it was a life. A hard life, yes, but a good one. A life we had fought for, bled for, and built from the ashes of betrayal and loss. One evening, as the sun bled crimson and gold across the western ridge, I stood on the porch, watching Samuel teach Jacob how to whittle, Ben and Jebediah sharing a pipe by the newly built community fire pit. You think we're truly safe now, Clara? Jebediah asked, his voice softer than usual. I looked out at the horizon, at the vast, wild land that had tested us to our very limits. Eli's grave was visible from here, a quiet reminder of the price of peace. No one's ever really safe out here, Jebediah, I said, a truth I'd learned in my bones. But we're strong. We're a community. And we're strong enough now, I reckon, to make safety for ourselves and for others who need it. Jebediah nodded, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face. Eli would have liked that. He surely would have. I thought of Eli, of his quiet strength, his unexpected kindness. He hadn't saved us, not entirely. He'd given us the time, the tools, the belief to save ourselves. He'd helped me remember the woman I was, the woman I could become. A quiet settled between us, not heavy, not hollow, just still. The wind whispered through the trees, no longer a mournful howl but a gentle sigh. It carried the scent of wood smoke, of baking bread, of life. My boys looked up, saw me watching, and waved. I smiled, a real, deep smile that reached my eyes. The scars were there, on the land, on our hearts. They always would be. But so was the strength, the resilience, the unexpected love that had blossomed in the harshest of soils. This was home, and we were, finally, at the beginning.